Our panelists today will share their views on the growing demand and the trade volume between China and the U.S., and explore China's investments in the U.S. and food safety and growing domestic demand become increasingly important. They will also address the challenges in this sector and the strategies necessary to further enhance the needed cooperation for mutually beneficial trade partnership.
So this panel will be moderated by Professor Jerry Nickelsburg, adjunct professor of economics at UCLA Anderson and senior economist of the UCLA Anderson Forecast. Professor Nickelsburg teaches economics in MBA program with a focus on Asian economies. He also recently led a group of 40 MBA students to Shanghai and Guangzhou for a global immersion course on business in a rapidly changing China. Please join me in welcoming our moderator and panelists for our first panel discussion.
So let me start with Steve Chen, who is my immediate left. He's owner and chief executive officer of YIHE Corporation, and he founded YIHE, which is engaged in seafood processing, import and export, wholesale and distribution. Through years of effort, YIHE, I'm sorry, that's YTHE, has become one of the largest salmon importers from China and distribution networks in the U.S., with major customers including Walmart, Albertsons, and Vons. Its Frontier Harvest Alaskan Jack's brand, salmon products, was the winner of Best New Retail at the 2015 Seafood Expo in North America. And kind of the list goes on and on, but I think what is really significant is Steve's story. He started as a fisherman and really learned this business from the ground up. Left fishing to go into the seafood business and has really grown that, first starting out of Qingdao in China, to a major enterprise. Let me ask you, Steve, to talk about, you've worked in the U.S. in the seafood industry, you worked in China, in fact, you started in China in Qingdao. They're kind of very different, or maybe they're not, spheres to do business in. Can you contrast your experience with that for us?
For China, seafood is history food. A lot of people like seafood, eat seafood. For U.S., actually, is I would say the new pretend for them. Used to be American people, American culture like beef, this kind of pretend. So the seafood, but seafood I would say is good pretend, easily for human being to observe that, and more healthy. Special for my fish, white caught in Alaska, is no pollution in there. Also more and more people realize that. So I even get a consumer email or so, okay, I feed my husband 2 or 3 times for salmon every week, and he get better healthy for high blood pressure, this kind of thing that was disappeared. I'm really happy for that. That's our job in here, to get a best food and service for the human being. In China is a lot of change in China. In past, I did that on the I learned in the for fishing resourcing, fisherman 5 year, commercial fisherman year. China changed a lot. When I was starting that, all import fish from Alaska, from overseas, they process it in China. Almost 100% bring back to the overseas, like North American marketing, Europe marketing, and Japan marketing. But in past 5 years, it start changing. So I have somebody call my plant, said, you have good white cod fish? I said, yes, it's from Alaska. oh, can I buy something from you? I said, sure, just come to buy, Then we pay the duty, sold to small distributor in China. So it's a grow up right now, More and more buyer, consumer interest in that because they think that's healthy, good return for the family, for their, special for their kids. They start spend money for that,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, part of the rising income
in
China.
Yes.
And the new Chinese consumer.
Yeah, that's what happened. Yeah.
Yeah. So now to your left is the second half of our Qingdao contingent here. Is Tony Cummins. Tony grew up in Ohio, working on dairy farms. He has an MS and BS degree from Ohio State University and a PhD from the Harvard Business School. After graduating from OSU, he went to work for H.J. Heinz in managing Northern California tomato operations. Later, he took a job with Basic Vegetable Products, which is a vertically integrated spice company with sales of over $250 million and operations in over 40 countries. And he was responsible for all U.S. and international operations, including sourcing from China. After selling his equity in Basic, he took a job managing a spice company with operations in Qingdao, China. That's the Qingdao connection. And I believe you said last night you had have a house in Qingdao, yes?
Correct. Yeah.
And the company was later sold to a large publicly traded company, named Olam, and he stayed with them for several years, is now focusing on acquisitions of agricultural businesses. Our next panelist is James Liu. James is founder of SeabuckWonders Incorporated. It's headquartered in Chicago, Illinois. James was born in Beijing and raised in the United States, and he learned from experts in both worlds, and that's what we're talking about here is both worlds. With strong academic credentials and significant branding and management experience forged early on at Andersen Consulting, not the same Andersen, that's Accenture now, and other Fortune 500 companies, he subsequently moved to a key man position with the innovative IT startup venture ubid.com and assisted it through an IPO less than 1 year after joining the company. By embracing natural living and enthusiasm for wellness, Liu next ventured into the rapidly expanding natural food industry, where he built a team of sales representatives located across all 50 states. His experience collaborating with U.S. regulatory agencies, including the FDA, was crucial in this. And at the same time, he maintains an extensive roster of international contacts within the natural foods marketplace and travels extensively to assure ready access to a premium production chain ranging from high-quality growers to state-of-the-art GPM manufacturers and national distributors. And so, in thinking about this, and this, of course, is a real growth area, natural foods and organic foods. But I guess, the question arises on the part of the consumer, how do they know that the products that they're getting are what they think they're getting, and how do you, but more importantly, how do you in the management of your business know that that supply chain is in fact delivering the kind of quality natural foods that you want to be selling?
Well, I think the answer to that is really simple: testing, testing, and testing. So in this, for the supply chain, it's very crucial to find reliable and reputable suppliers. That is really the first step. But when the goods really reach your plant, your facility, it becomes your responsibility to make sure that it is what it really is. So the supplier can be, honest businessman, but they can still make errors, or their employee can make mistakes too. So as the next stage, I would say it kind of becomes our responsibility to really make sure that the product is what it is, We do identity testing. We do heavy metals, microbes. In certain cases, if the product is supposed to be organic, we do testing on the pesticides, herbicides, to really make sure that the quality is there. So there's really no shortcut in that. It's really about testing.
And I think we want to come back to that as we're talking about food quality. But let me now turn to Chris Wheeler, who is our fourth panelist. And Chris is a well-known international financial cross-border executive and operations manager with deep personal experience in the complex and highly regulated fields of healthcare services, food production, consumer product, and pharmaceutical manufacturing and distribution in both the United States and Asia. He's currently managing director and co-founder of both LOHAS Farms LLC and Optimal Nutrition LLC. Wheeler is deeply involved in the sourcing and manufacturing of high-quality American-made food and nutritional supplements with a focus on selling such products to the rapidly growing Asian consumer population. He serves as the sponsor and co-operating manager of a major farmland development and reclamation project located in Southeast Asia that will ultimately control and manage over 1 million acres of farmland. And the project will be a benchmark for the reclaiming and reinvigoration of heretofore unproductive farmland by providing modern farming methods, technologies, and capitals to create a vertical network that will maximize crop production from the planting of seeds to the sale of the finished product. And let me just digress. In each of these cases, I haven't read the full bio, but you have them in your packet because I want to hear from our panelists. So Chris, in addition to your work with LOHAS Farms, you also serve as co-founder and managing director of AJC Wealth Advisors and have extensive experience as an investment banker. So can you shed some light on how that experience might provide advice for others who are looking at investments in the agricultural sector?
You need to ensure the quality, and with the quality, it's not price sensitive. Products that are not price sensitive, especially if they're American made and American certified, like James is OMRI certified or those kinds of certifications and tested and proven and trusted. It's not about the economics, it's about distribution at that point. It's about getting your reputation out there. As bankers, we looked at, as investors, we looked at where can we have the most impact as well, because one of my strongest partners is a fairly wealthy group that is interested in socially impacting the world. And you start with farmers. I mean, at the end of the day, it starts with food and the basic consumption of food and food quality. And we actually started in Southeast Asia, not because we didn't want to start in China, but because the Chinese agricultural industry, as Tony alluded to, is so fragmented. You can't get the scale. We can't get 1 million acres in China. The government can't give you 1 million acres in China. The government of Vietnam could deliver us 1 million acres. So it's a fundamental, the investment opportunities in agriculture, especially focusing on Asia and especially subset of the consumer, is immense. The second generation of that, and why the governments of Vietnam and China and Cambodia and all these other places are interested in enhancing their agriculture, is twofold. One is to reinvigorate soil that's been overworked, badly worked. The statistic that there's only 7% arable land in China is really even misstated, because 30% of that is, or 30% of that is probably not really as arable because it's been over-fertilized, it's been over-chemicaled, it's got water problems. Solve those issues, make more land arable, make more land production, and then governments like countries like Vietnam can start exporting food, not just importing for their own consumption. They're all moving along the lines of being able to think about the next generation of food production, which is, can we in fact make food an export item, get to the quality levels to export it to the West, get it to the quality levels to export it to other countries. That requires the same disciplines and technologies that the United States has gone through for years and years, decades. And they're looking to implement those kinds of systems procedures, just like they have in the technology business or any other field. And it's a vertically integrated chain that is going to present so many business opportunities. So yeah, I think that the economics of agriculture is huge, in Asia especially, and eventually in China, if we can ever get the government to. If they can get people off the land, they'll be fine.
So let's talk about the regulatory environment. You know, if you're just dealing within the U.S., that's a pretty, I don't want to say it's a pretty clear regulatory environment, but it's one regulatory environment. If you're talking about China, it's one regulatory environment, a different one. But if you're talking about whether it's investing or exporting or importing across these borders, you've got two different and kind of very different regulatory environments. How does one navigate that in agricultural business? That's
Is it a general question? Or?
That's a general question. So anyone can jump in. Tony, you look like you're ready to.
If there's a shortage of food products in China, the government will help you to get those food products into China. We've seen tremendous cooperation in our industry where the Chinese government worked well with the importation of grain crops as well as food processed crops. If, on the other hand, you're trying to take something into China that there isn't real demand and you're trying to replace that with U.S.-made products, then the issues around government get much more complicated.
Well, I'm a little more cynical than that. I think that there's also the protectionist issues. The Chinese government is as good as the American government when it comes to protecting their industries from foreign imports. The dairy industry in China is under tremendous pressure. To take infant formula from the United States into China, certified by the U.S. FDA, is an act of God. It's taken us 3 years. And you deal with the SFDA, they treat it like a drug. They regulate it like a drug. And that's because they didn't pay any attention to it 8 years ago and killed people, killed children. And it's, the pendulum swung the other way. But it's also to protect the dairy industry. There's no pretense about it. I mean, there are, and America's the same way. We're very protectionist about our agriculture and industry. So Americans have a tendency to think that we're the only ones that are fair. Well, no, we have as unlevel a playing field as anybody else. We just know the game. They're learning a game.
Right, and that has a lot to do with food being part of national security, right? Food security.
It's true.
If you have hungry people, you do not have social stability. But Steve, you're moving fish back and forth across borders. What sort of, I don't want to say regulatory nightmares, but regulatory hoops do you have to jump through because you are doing these cross-border transactions?
Yeah, you know, our fish is pretty easy because white cod fish is almost nothing in China. Mm-hmm. So what we do is just, you know, based on the law, pay the duty, tax, everything, and get in. You know, it's really simple because no competitive similar production in China, and the Chinese consumer need that. So the only way is, yeah, that's right now the government tried cut off all illegal seafood coming into China. Because a lot of people play game, they don't pay duty, they don't pay taxes, get in to sell that. So they do much better job in past 3 years, I saw that. So that's very good for our supplier to get same level come to China. So they do pretty good job in there. In the US, it's easy because FDA or USDC, you know, can inspection your plant like FDA, certify your plant is good, and your fish from Alaska come to your plant, producing, come back. So we have traceability in there, system in there to show them. It's pretty easy to get in. Yeah.
And do you have the same, James, the same traceability issues, you know, with the natural foods and supplements that you're importing?
You know, if it's healthful dietary supplement is regulated extremely strictly. So to get these products into China, it takes lots of effort. They have a whole different system of certifying the product, approving the product. For every product, it can take up to 3 years, $100,000 in cost. But in the U.S., the FDA, the rule is already set. It's pretty clear. It's much easier to navigate.
Let's turn to liability. So in the U.S., liability resides with the food producer, with the farmer, with the processor, and maybe to some extent with the retailer, but it's really with the with the folks who are producing the food. If the food is in some way tainted, and in China the liability is kind of reversed. It's primarily with the retailer, and it's the retailer's responsibility to ensure that that the food is not tainted. Do you run into any of these liability issues? Is that just a matter of having really good lawyers in China? Or?
For example, the application of pesticides. When a farmer in the U.S. wants to apply an insecticide to a food crop, a controlled pest control advisor comes out and says, you're going to treat 100 acres. Here's how much of that pesticide you can buy. In the case of China, there's no traceability because there are so many small farms to a mass product, you can't trace it back to its source. So it's a much more difficult process in China to get the regulations and the clarity of product and the cleanliness that you need to move product into the U.S. It's much easier, I know it's tough for you guys to go the other direction, but it's much easier going that way than coming from China to the U.S. for the food product.
Because of the traceability.
Traceability,
yeah.
cleanliness.
And that goes back to what James was saying about testing, and testing, right?
Yes. And now it's gotten to the point that the customers who carry the bulk of the liability actually put the liability on your shoulders by saying it's your responsibility to do the testing. We will test your tests occasionally to make sure they're good, but you're going to do all the testing and certify your product. So they pass the liability back down to the producer.
But that's not legal liability, that's rather a condition of them being customers, right?
It kind of goes together because if there's a recall of product in the food industry, you're on the hook for it.
We're being, we're getting a lot of inquiries from China about our projects in Southeast Asia, mostly to be able to produce higher volumes of animal feed. Again, the protein base is fish, pork. Pork is the number one.
Right.
Beef, not so much. So they're all trying to get cheaper quality feed. And so cassava, things like that. Those are now becoming money crops for export out of our Southeast Asian operations into China. At this level, exporting food from Southeast Asia into China is probably fairly simple in that the inspection levels are nowhere near as onerous as trying to get it in the U.S. Not going to get it in the U.S. None of this stuff's going to get in the U.S. But if I were going to point to a trend that we're seeing by our inquiries, it's non-edible, more along the lines of either consumables for animals or consumables for textiles. Industrial hemp is a big product in kanaf, which is used for high-end paper. All things that can be grown readily, fairly simply, and harvested fairly simply, and become sell. So it's follow the money.
What we're seeing now is there's a tremendous opportunity for a U.S. producer to target that palate and try to meet that market demand.
See, in China also very popular right now. A lot of young people, they don't want cooking couple hours in their family home. They just want easy way, but they want clearly make sure it's healthy. Good for the healthy.
So it sounds like the new Chinese markets are the first-tier cities, right? That are crowded but have lots of good restaurants and a fairly large middle class.
Yeah, they grow up on middle class.
Yeah.
Yes.
Let me close as we're coming to the end of this with a question for you all. We have a lot of Anderson students here and a lot of UCLA students who are hopefully going to be Anderson students after they get their bachelor's degree. What advice would you have to them about entering the agricultural sector and how they might do it and why they might do that?
Arable land is pretty much static for the last 20 years, and I don't see that changing in the future.
Water.
So if you just look at supply and demand, there's a tremendous opportunity to feed the world. In America, we're fortunate to have about 12% of the arable land in the world and only 5% of the population. So we are positioned very well in the U.S. to supply that market. So it looks like a tremendous opportunity. Within that, we think of the growth of population in India and China. But yet, and you add Africa to that, Africa will be, in 2050, will be as big as India and China combined. So there's tremendous opportunity for agriculture right now when you look at the future of the population in the world.
So as an economist, I see this as the supply curve is not moving very fast, and the demand curve is,
Yes.
which means higher prices and higher profitability.
Definitely.
That is an excellent recommendation.
But the correlation is there needs to be an emphasis on enhanced production. And in the emerging markets, China included, they are woefully behind in the production scale compared to the West. And where the opportunities are, I think, for students who are interested in going is to understanding and then transferring as many of the technologies the West uses for farming and food production and being able to apply them to those emerging markets, including China. And that's, again, like our our program in Southeast Asia is pretty much a vertically integrated effort to do that, to bring the best of all technologies to bear, not techno, but you'd be amazed what kind of technological things that are happening now in agriculture. Tony knows. I mean, it's mind-boggling because at the end of the day, people have figured out this is a huge industry. This is going to be the biggest, and it has the most impact. Outside of water, there's no more impactful thing in the world than food.
Right. And so that land reclamation and land rationalization is critically important and a real interesting area to be in.
Yeah.
So that's great. We are out of time, so please join me in thanking our panel for being here.